over 24 hours since the 4-page summary of the Mueller report written by Attorney General Barr was made public.
Some Republicans are calling it vindication for President Trump, while some Democrats feel there are a lot of questions left unanswered. The director of the Marquette Law School poll, Charles Franklin, joins us with his perspective. Welcome.
Thank you.
No news weekend, huh?
Yeah, it's been a quiet weekend here. A little basketball, a little hockey, and now this.
A lot of questions remain, but one question's answered. There was Russian influence on the 2016 election.
I think that is one of the things that's a little overlooked in the immediate coverage is the Barr summary of the Mueller report says there's clear evidence that Russia sought to influence the election through social media, and a number of Russians have been charged in that. And secondly, that Russians were involved in the hacking of the Democratic National Committee servers and emails. So that sets those two parts about did Russia try to interfere pretty clearly on the yes, they did side. But then it also says the Trump campaign did not coordinate or conspire with the Russians in those efforts. And then finally, that on the question of obstruction of justice, the report does not reach a conclusion, and the Attorney General then concludes that no prosecution is warranted on obstruction charges.
So what does this mean now moving forward?
Well, I think it means, first of all, we'd like to see the full Mueller report released, perhaps with some redactions for parts that are grand jury proceedings or involve other cases.
Do you think that will happen?
I think it so far looks likely to happen. Barr signals in his letter that he wants to do that. The White House has mostly said it wants to do that. Trump himself has said he has no objection. Things could always spin out of control before it's over with, but I'd be very surprised if there's substantial resistance to releasing it. And for context, the 4-page Barr letter is hardly the full explanation of what Mueller's findings were. So seeing the full Mueller report is pretty important, even if these are the conclusions, which mean no prosecution for obstruction of justice and no finding of the Trump campaign cooperating or coordinating, or colluding, if you prefer that term, with Russia on their explicit interference, which, again, the report does find the Russians interfered.
But Mueller would not come out and say, no, there's no obstruction of justice.
The phrase that Barr quotes in there says, this neither concludes that there's evidence to charge obstruction, nor does it exonerate the president or the White House. So that vague finding that the evidence is not strong enough either way left it to the Attorney General, who concludes in his letter again that no prosecution is going to be followed. There you see much more room for a judgment call, and again, reading the entire report undoubtedly won't settle the issue to everyone's satisfaction, but would lay out the full set of considerations.
Can you talk a little bit about the Southern District of New York? Will they pick up the ball at this point?
Yeah. Well, we know from some court filings that the Southern District of New York, the federal prosecutors there, are pursuing some cases. They don't grow directly out of Russia's involvement in the election so far as I'm aware. But they do touch on other elements such as the Presidential Inauguration Committee and its spending, some influences, some things going around about the Trump business enterprise. So we could certainly see more developing there, but it's essentially separate from the Mueller investigation.
And this certainly doesn't settle anything. Both sides are in their corners, and this is far from over.
No, I think both sides will certainly interpret the results in ways that fit with their beliefs. You know, Hillary Clinton, when the email server was investigated in 2016, and the FBI said that no prosecutor would charge her based on this evidence, that didn't settle the issue for Republicans who were convinced that she had done something wrong. It seems unlikely that these conclusions or the full report will convince Democrats that Trump has not done something wrong. But there's a distinction between doing things that are politically wrong and things that are criminally wrong. And here we have the Mueller report concluding that there's not a criminal case to be made.
Well, it'll be interesting to see the full report if and when it comes out.
Certainly will be.
Charles, thank you as usual.
Glad you had
Another
a boring
weekend of fun reading, when it comes out.
And the women's hockey team won on the national championship.
That's right.
That was the big news.
That's the big one for me.
All right, Charles, thank you. We'll be right back with the final check of your forecast.